So insights into UAE's data protection law. So the session today is kind of focused upcoming law in UAE, in Dubai, and how it is going to affect the world, and especially India, right? Because India, I think why we are so concerned, because I think we are highly affected by our neighbors, close, not neighbors directly, but very close countries. And we have a lot of business to do with them. So, and especially people in UAE as well. So India kind of becomes a support center to kind of doing a lot of work. So kind of it kind of shakes hand everywhere while doing this webinar to kind of see where all we can reach as Tsaaro, as Privado, as you, as us. So a bit about our guest here, Vaibhav. So Vaibhav is CEO and co-founder at Privado. He's also CIPM. So that's a bit about Vaibhav, right? About me, I am CEO and co-founder of Tsaaro, right? We do a lot of privacy consulting work. Also, we run an academy where we teach a lot of things that we learn in academy. So that is about me. I'm also CIPM, by the way. Also CIPPE, CIPT, FIP, IVP advisory board. So a lot of credentials just taken by chance, right? By luck, I guess. So yeah. So that has also happened with me. I think Vaibhav, would you like to take that minute and kind of also introduce Privado to everyone?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, essentially at Privado, we are helping companies ship code fast without breaking privacy. And essentially the way we are doing that is by, we've built a code scanning tool. It integrates with the developer's workflow. So essentially GitHub, GitLab, these are tools where developers are maintaining code for their products, applications, APIs, data, machine learning models, etc. So we scan the source code itself to automatically give privacy folks the information they're manually seeking via interviews, which is what's the data this product processes, what are the third-party integrations here, what are the data flows which goes from here. And then since we are a part of the developer's workflow, we can also monitor. So if a new code change, let's say a new software update is going to increase the amount of data that your company is collecting, we will create an alert and start remediation around it. So essentially we are helping companies to sort of make privacy compliance at the speed of development, which is weekly and daily. Yeah, that's about Privado.
So yeah, from the developers end, guys, right? Vaibhav is here. So I think what we have also been doing is we have been kind of supplementing, and I think we kind of also sit very good with Privado, where our projects, we work with clients. Then we also are doing a lot of use cases, and we have been doing projects together with Privado, where we do that app scan to kind of fill that rope automatically, right? And yes, obviously, we do something like ROPA manually, then PIAs, right? And again, right? All the privacy compliance things that kind of come to mind. And that is about us. Okay, so how is it different from GDPR? I think this is something that we'll take up. Some people know about this, right? A bit of an overview. Okay, yes. Okay, I love yeses, right? I think people with yes, I want you to participate in this session, right? Even answer people in the chat. I think that would be lovely. So when I was a kid, right? So there are two types of discussions that used to happen with me. So whenever my teacher used to ask me, right, that Akash, did you understand? So if I understood, I said clear. But if I did not understand, I used to say all clear. So I think that is kind of a segment for I have a clean slate. Yeah. So I can fairly see Vaibhav. I think probably putting in some context here is it's very, very fairly good that some part of the people who are here actually have some context of the law, right?
Yeah.
It kind of makes a lot of sense for both of us, right, as well today, to kind of get in and maybe take those questions heads on. And people who don't know this session is for you, meant for you, made for you, right? We just made all these slides for you, right? So I think you are in the best case scenario today. Okay. How does the law applies? What is the similarity between UAE and GDPR law? What are the requirements under law? What are the functions of the regulator, the data protection regulator that is coming in Dubai, right? The UAE data protection regulator. And what will happen to cross-border data transfers now outside of Dubai? Earlier, it was outside of Europe that we were so concerned about. And what are the things that an organization can do, right? Okay. So how does this law apply, and whom does it apply to, Vaibhav?
So I think, yeah, so from an applicability perspective, it's written very similar to even GDPR. So it has extraterritorial consequences, which means this is a law which does not only apply to companies who are in UAE, basically company registered in UAE. It applies to, first of all, companies even outside UAE. And there are a couple of criteria which are taken. So first of all, let's say to make things clear, so if you are a company registered in UAE, data protection law applies to you, whether you're processing data of citizens or residents of UAE or India or Europe, wherever, right? So that's one. Second is any company, even if it's not registered in UAE, let's say, it's a US company and providing services in UAE. So processing residents' data of UAE, then that company also comes under the law. So these are like two kind of companies which will sort of come in. One is if you are registered in UAE, then 100% by law you come under the law. Second is if you are outside UAE but processing data of residents of UAE, then also that processing comes under the data protection law. So it's very, very sort of similar to how GDPR is written as well.
We kind of mean Dubai a lot. We kind of use that term a lot because we do a lot of business in Dubai. So I'm really sorry for that. But yeah, we mean UAE as a whole. Yeah. Does the US company need to have an establishment within UAE above, before and after, for this law to apply or not?
No, so as far as I understand, it's not you. Even if there is no establishment, but you are processing data of, or you are targeting, let's say, UAE citizens, 100% the law applies to you. So you don't need to have an establishment in UAE. If you have, then automatically it applies. If you don't have, then the criteria is basically the processing which you are doing for the citizens of UAE, or residents actually, not even citizens, residents of UAE. In that context, the law will apply. So imagine, let's say you are a company, Indian company, which is let's say has consumers in India, and then also UAE consumers can open it up, your website, and can sign up and do a couple of things. Then that part of the processing will come under the data protection law.
Right. Vaibhav, it kind of sounds very similar to GDPR to me in terms of application, doesn't it?
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. So basically, in case, I think the bottom line is always that if you are kind of processing data of European nationals, then it kind of becomes the bottom line to kind of the application of the law. And a very similar lines have been chosen for UAE, but obviously it will get more complex here because there are a few more integrities here and there. But yeah.
Yeah, and same as even the India Data Protection Bill is same. So if you look at all the modern data privacy laws, they follow the same extraterritorial nature of,
Right.
protecting. I mean, even if the company is there or not, they will like to protect their, citizens' data.
Right. I think the very similar thing happened with China, right? I think China kind of made one of the most stringent laws in privacy in the world. And I think denied a lot of entry and exit to data in China, especially. So I think moving on to our next question, PDPL. So we have PDPL and GDPR. How do you differentiate both of them? So what do you think is the difference today in both the laws, Vaibhav?
I would say they are more similar than different. I think maybe if we start going into the nitty-gritties of where it would differ, I think there might be certain government exemptions which exist in the law, which could be in the UAE PDPL law, which might not be there in GDPR. I think secondly, and this is also very preliminary reading on my side, which is that for certain data, like I think processing of health data and I think financial data, they already have some laws, and then those kind of processing does not come under PDPL, while I think GDPR covers both and has some precedence. So I think these were the two that I was able to see. And yeah, I think, of course, since UAE is sort of the newer law, they will come up with more clarifications and we will start knowing the impact of the law, right? Like, let's say cross-border transfer, what's the adequacy list for UAE is going to look like? Europe has a very thorough process of deciding the countries. What's UAE's process? Is it all countries which are under GDPR, are they adequate in UAE, or is there going to be some other criteria? So some of those things we have to see.
So I think it's kind of an applicability, Vaibhav. So I'm going to put that question to you right now.
Yeah.
So I think Ashish London has asked a very good question. If I'm using UAE currency as part of my services, right, the dirham, right? So suppose I have an e-commerce website in India targeting individuals in UAE, right? So what do you think? Like, will the law apply or not?
Yeah. So it will only apply to the processing that you're doing for that. So for example, it won't apply. Let's say you will have employees in India, and for that processing, of course, to your entire company, that PDPL never applies. It will apply to the process of sort of you will be doing marketing in UAE, you will be sending them, so there will be a process where they will come and buy. That entire flow, delivery of ships, delivery of products on that via that e-commerce website, that will come under PDPL. So which means, for example, for UAE, you might have a different 3PL partner who's actually delivering the goods from you, right? So those will come under those obligations, they will have under PDPL, not under the India law in your case. Think of it in terms of data processing. What's the data processing where UAE residents are coming in? All of those would come under PDPL, and then you will have to look at all the relative clauses of the PDPL for them, not for your entire company.
Yeah. When we kind of target someone to buy something in Dubai, then it automatically kind of, so basically, even if let's say I'm doing marketing and targeting, right?
Yeah.
Even if I'm doing LinkedIn ads, right? Tsaaro Academy does a lot of LinkedIn ads, so that's where I've learned it. So we can do location-based ad. So location-based ad directly means that, it will become applicable. If the IP of the person who's kind of coming to our website is from Dubai, then we have a high sale value there, right? If we have more, not one or single transaction, and obviously we are targeting them, that's why they're buying from us. So if those things are happening, then we need to do this. We don't have an option, right? Okay. Ashish has another question, again applicability. So Vaibhav, I'm going to let you take this up.
Yeah. So what I understand is the question, if it's a UAE website targeting non-UAE residents. So I'm assuming when you say a UAE website, it's a UAE registered business. Then yeah, they will have to comply with the PDPL law, which means they will have to give the rights. I mean, the entirety of the law, entirety of the rights are applicable there. Yeah, that's correct.
So I think we are good then with questions. So good questions, guys, and thanks Nadia for helping us out here. So talking about requirements of law, Vaibhav, right? I think if we kind of, let's say a company X, right, kind of wants to jump in with this law, and I think we have not been doing business in Europe, anywhere outside the world. So now we are a Dubai-based company, right? And we're doing a lot of business there. So how do you think, right? What are these requirements, from a general perspective, rather than comparing it with GDPR? What are these things that a business has to do?
Yeah, sure. So I think, I mean, you've sort of laid down them very, very well. So, and I'm sort of looking at this more from an obligation perspective, right? So what's the obligation that a company has? So first of all, yeah, a couple of them you've already listed. One is that you need to have, if you're processing data, personal data of, and that processing comes under the PDPL law, you need to have a lawful basis of processing, which means that you have to rely on certain clauses which exist in the law. One is consent, which is the most heavy one in the PDPL law. There are some others. There is nothing like legitimate interest here, but there is something called contract. That could be something which you could sort of use. Of course, there are the usual suspects, like if there is some processing which is needed for a certain law that is allowed. So one big difference that I've seen is that the lawful basis mostly is consent. So you have to obtain consent for most of the processing. And I think the second one that you can explore is the contract as a legal basis. That's a powerful one. I've seen even a lot of European companies do that. Then contract, sort of this consent has its own definition, which is similar to GDPR, which is it has to be specific, which means you have to take it for a specific purpose. You can't have a general consent for all processing. It has to be informed, so it has to be very clear what you're doing. It has to be affirmative, so user has to come and click yes. And then the law does not, at least the translated one that I've read, does not say that that withdrawal has to be as easy as giving consent, but it has to be easy enough, is what I've read. So that's how consent is defined.
So if legitimate interest is not recognized, wouldn't be overhead on companies, right? Okay, Vaibhav, again.
Yeah, this is a challenge. This is going to be a challenge. Again, we will have to read what all things can come under this contract, because contract is again also used widely in Europe. Of course, legitimate interest is used the most, but yeah, that is going to be an overhead. That's correct, Smruti, for sure. This is the same challenge even in the Indian bill, where we do have something called reasonable business purpose, but that's also very restricted. It's not as broad as legitimate interest, as far as I understand. So yeah, exactly. So yeah, Suhas pointed out it's similar to China PIPL. They also don't have legitimate interest. That's correct. Yeah. So Amol, yes, you need to maintain RUPA documents. That's an obligation.
I just want to start this quiz as well. In between. So guys, menti.com, and Vaibhav, I'll let you answer it, right? So which legal basis of processing has not been included in this law when compared with GDPR, right?
Yeah, I think we answered this one. So till people are answering, I was just answering Amol's question. Amol, yes, as a controller and processor, you in both circumstances, you need to maintain separate ROPA documents. That is under the law. And then you have a question around representative. I will have to check. I'm not sure about this piece. I mean, we can chat about this offline. Yeah, legitimate interest, of course, is correct. That's the answer. I think the rest are there. As far as I understand, there is consent, there is contract, there is public interest, there is vital interest of the protecting interest of the data subject. So maybe that's that one. And there is, yeah, legal obligation as well.
Yeah, so I think kind of pointing out legitimate interest kind of becomes the biggest change and issue for a corporate, right? So calling it out makes a lot of sense, right? And obviously, I think vital interest as directly is not there, but obviously, I think some caveat down the line would be there for it, because medical emergencies are always covered, directly, indirectly there.
Yeah. So medical emergencies are there, like public health is there, and even occupational data processing for medical emergencies is covered. I was just taking up Pratik's question, which was around data retention. So yeah, interestingly, the principle remains the same. Is that the retention is defined as, you have to, you can store the data till the end of processing of the purpose is there, right? So like that retention limitation or storage limitation exists as is GDPR, that the moment the purpose of processing ends, you have to sort of delete the data. Are there any data retention laws with PDPL? I am not an expert on that, but there must be, right? So like in each country, there will be certain laws around how long you need to store financial data, employee data. So I think those laws will have to be referred separately to decide your retention schedules, like you do for India or Europe or any other country.
Okay, so next thing, right? So requirements. So what are these top 4 requirements that a corporate now?
Yeah, I think a couple of them there are requirements. I think the first one to begin would always will be like creating a ROPA register, because everything else will follow. So having that up-to-date ROPA register, appointing a data protection officer, and is that applicable for you or not? And then in case of a breach, there is notification to the regulator which is needed. And the timelines, as far as I know, is not yet defined. So we'll have to wait on that. Then DPI, again, there are conditions like systematic processing of data or sensitive data. So, similar to GDPR, there are conditions. When do you have to do DPI? If there are some questions, I can, of course, refer and answer that as well. Selection of data processor is similar, in which you have to make sure security is maintained. Like the similar security standards are there in your data processor, which means doing third-party risk management. And there is specific laws for technical and organizational measures as well. Ashish, time to respond to data breach is not yet there. The version I had read, it had written that they will sort of tell us later, or there would be some communication on that from the regulator later. Akash, I think there are some interesting questions around cross-border transfer as well. So yeah, if you want, we can discuss that also.
Yeah, I think we should kind of focus on questions and take it up one by one, because cross-border data transfer again becomes a beautiful thing like GDPR, right? Because I think adequacy has been called out again.
Yeah,
right?
So
I've been reading about this, and then
yeah, Akash, you're right actually. So the adequacy is the first one. If there is no adequacy, I think there are two more. There is some version of standard contractual clauses written, and then there is also express consent. These are the three that I for sure remember, which are there as transfer mechanisms. So Neeraj has a question. So when we are handling data of UAE individual in whichever country for processing, what cross-border laws apply? In any case, your opinion. So if you are processing data of UAE individuals, for that processing, PDPL law applies. For the cross-border transfer, you will need a transfer mechanism. Again, in case the country where this processing is happening, let's say Europe, in most cases, of course, it seems Europe will get the adequacy. So in that case, that mechanism would be adequacy. Let's say another country where there is no adequacy, in that case, either whichever organization is getting the data will have to sign the contract which is recommended by the regulator, which is something like a standard contractual clause.
I think if you look at Europe right now, so I think privacy heroes are the regulators, and as well as the users and customers today. So again, I think new regulator, and obviously if there is a privacy law, there's a privacy regulator, they both come hand in hand, right? And obviously privacy regulator comes in, to kind of look at all the cases, being a data protection office, right? So Vaibhav, what is your take on Dubai's UAE's specific data protection office? And how do you see it will bring a change in privacy, right? Or it will make difficult for companies by regulating it? So yeah, over to you.
I mean, it's good to have that regulator because then enforcement happens and ultimately consumers benefit. And ultimately, like, while we can think these regulations are bringing some burden, but if you look at from perspective, we are all sort of benefiting from consumers being connected to internet, the internet economy. And if privacy is there, then consumers will trust more. So you can weed out the bad companies, and if you're a good company who cares about consumers' privacy, you will flourish. So I think overall it's net positive for consumers and companies alike. Regulator is of course responsible to now explain the sort of implementation of the law. So there are some things which are left, and also sort of listen to the industry in terms of, well, let's say legitimate interest. That is a big concern that even like privacy professionals are talking here. So even looking at that and giving some guidelines on how data analytics can be looked at if there is no legitimate interest, and if consent is the only legal basis, right? So I think, yeah, regulator is super important. I think overall also having these regulators, it will also smoothen out with time sort of international laws, right? So GDPR has some implication, the Dubai one has some other implication. So for multinationals, I think all these regulators at some point of time will smoothen the laws, or at least try to make them at par, so that it's easier for everyone to comply across the globe. So I think, yeah, these are the advantages.
Yeah, I think Vaibhav, I would actually like to open up the session for Q&A only. So question number one, does contract mean the same in PDPL, like signing a contract, providing a consent?
No, so contract is a separate legal basis than consent. So these are sort of two different data processing legal bases. They're not the same. And I think what would contract mean? That's a good question. It's not, I mean, like signing the contract, even on the contract, you will have consent forms, right? Like if you today even open a bank account, they will ask you consent for, sending marketing emails, right? That's a separate, consent is separate. You could have a contract processing for contract, and even in the contract, like a data processing, which is reliant on consent itself.
So the addend contract nowadays for a bank is like that, right?
Yeah,
That's where
exactly.
we are coming to.
Yeah, so bank has a contract wherein opening the account, let's take that as a data processing, relies on that contract. But within that contract, there will be a consent specifically for a separate data processing activity, which is marketing.
Right. And Vaibhav, do you think the reason behind this opening would be a thing like a GDPR principle or a privacy gap principle, purpose limitation?
Yeah, first of all, it's like you are separating two processing activities, which is one is opening an account and the second is marketing. So, and each has to have a legal basis. So you're now defining legal basis. Okay. So one is opening an account. Is consent the legal basis there? I mean, and what does it mean if you withdraw the consent? So maybe contract becomes a better one there. And then marketing, yes, yeah, consent can be a good legal basis. Generally, that's what is followed worldwide. There are laws which actually force in Europe also for marketing, you have to take consent. So yeah, so the second data processing activity, which is marketing, consent becomes the good one. So yeah, it's sort of separating purpose limitation, separating defining processing activities well, and then deciding the legal basis for each one separately. Another one could be like, for example, on contract, if you purchase something, right? So that like warranty or relative to warranty or purchases, those could be completely contract driven data processing. And again, as a part of it, you would still like to keep the marketing activities separate.
Okay, so Aniket has a question, right? Will this federal DP law will overtake the existing DP law in UAE?
Akash, I'll rely on you for this answer.
I think I will also rely on somebody in the chat for this answer, right? So
Okay,
because
there is
a
no
data
existing
privacy
DP.
law, right, as Smriti has pointed out, I think there are a lot of consumer rights laws that I have studied in the past when I worked with clients.
Specific.
So I worked with consumer rights laws, and also there is cybersecurity law, right? So those are the two things where I kind of made all those frameworks, and kind of did my work. But data privacy law would be new, right? Achha, okay, he's talking about DIFC. Okay, that's interesting that DIFC popped up. So basically DIFC again. So DIFC kind of becomes the financial controller. So DIFC is a copy paste of GDPR, by the way. So I kind of went into DIFC deep down, delved into it last year. I think companies following DIFC are exempted. Thanks, Smriti, for that.
Yeah, Smriti has been super helpful. Thanks, Smriti. Srinivas also has a question, I think. but CPR is not applicable to employee data. Does it mean PDPL will applicable to banks for processing employee data? Yeah, Srinivas, that's correct. Let's say UAE banks, when they're processing employee data, it will come under PDPL because the exemption is for, I think, two kind of data processing. One was, I think, financial, which is the one you are referring, and the second was for health because there are sector specific laws for them.
Right, Vaibhav. So Vaibhav, I think we've kind of, did a lot of Q&A, right? And I think the kind of information that we wanted to get ahead with, right? So guys, I think we're coming to end of the session.
Yeah.
Right? So I just wanted to kind of thank you everyone for joining the session. I know this is a session where we are getting technical, and obviously whatever technical questions you have, reach out to us. We'll take them more, right? We'll take them heads on, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think probably in March you can also see us in Dubai, right, doing more discussions. So why not catching up and getting in more into depth? So guys, that is about me and Vaibhav. So Vaibhav, would you like to thank everyone? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the session and the amazing question. One is about talking about the law, but I mean, sort of when implementation and those questions come up, that's the fun part, in my opinion. And yeah, would again, like, I think my profile is there, happy to connect with anyone. And if your companies have engineers, I think we should definitely chat and talk about how we can sort of help you guys.
Right.
Yeah. And thanks
Definitely.
again.
If you are doing product development, anything app development, I think there is an app scan for you that you can obviously reach out to Vaibhav. And I think that next step in privacy will automatically be taken care of. So thank you everyone for joining the session, and I will see you again. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye-bye.